everyone to our session. My name is Aneta Marin and this is Mickey Ross. And we are working on this project together with Julia Bollman, who is not with us here, but she's an academic advisor at Glasgow University. We're planning today to talk about the project that we started last year around September. And hope you won't be disappointed. We wanted to let you know that we will be telling you about the current stage of our project. We're hoping to be a little bit further ahead than we are at the moment. So we'll be talking mainly about our systematic literature review and the findings, and the plans for the future about developing materials on reflective writing for students. So the plan for today is, first of all, to tell you about our rationale of focusing on reflective writing for assessment, and then tell you about the project, plans for the future, and our reflections so far. So why have we decided to talk about reflective writing? The importance of reflective writing has been widely discussed in the literature, and it has been used at universities more frequently now, promoting more reflective approach to practice, more holistic approach to assessment, helping students develop their professional identities. And there is also a big push at the universities to develop students' graduate attributes. And we have seen that at many institutions, reflective writing is listed as one of the graduate attributes that students are expected to develop. But when we were working on courses that involved the reflective writing component, we saw that even though there are a lot of benefits of reflective writing and reflection in general, there are challenges when reflection is introduced as a form of assessment. And this involved academic literacy. So when students traditionally are taught to develop their academic skills, writing skills, reflection is very often not listed as one of them. For many students who are coming, or we were teaching on the courses, reflection was a completely new concept. They did struggle with the idea of being more personal in the writing, because so far they have been told that they need to write in a more formal, impersonal style. And they struggled with the idea of talking about their personal experiences and then linking them to the theory. So what we have seen in a lot of assessment is that the students were either talking about their personal reflections, or they were talking about theory separately. They were not necessarily linking these two. The other issue that we have come across was also assessment literacy. So we as teachers, we didn't always have the tools and the knowledge to assess reflective writing. And when we're working with our teams, there was a lot of discussion of, there was a lot of subjectivity in how we're approaching the task. And we felt that we didn't necessarily have the tools to understand reflection as a form of assessment. There were also ethical issues, and we found that in many of the tasks that students were asked to engage in, they were really opening up about their personal experiences, and they were becoming very vulnerable and honest about what they have been experiencing. And sometimes the fact that they were not meeting the intended learning outcomes could have a potential negative effect on their success in academia or the confidence in academic writing as well. There was also the issue of ethics in terms of our preparation as teachers to assess writing and students' preparation for taking a reflective writing as form of assessment. If you're asking students to complete a reflective writing task, but we haven't prepared them sufficiently for this task, is it ethical to assess them on this task if we haven't given them the tools to complete it? And there was also an issue of performativity. So a lot of students would reflect on a very superficial level. And this is because they were looking at the intended learning outcomes, and it was a tick box exercise. So it didn't achieve that, that part of deep reflection and actually the transformative experience that we were hoping the students would go through by engaging in the reflective task. So Mickey is going to tell you more about our project.
Yeah, so these are some of the things which started this project. So for instance, having set reflective writing, coming into a calibration meeting for that marking, and then not actually really been able to decide Like, what is criticality when it comes to reflective writing? How should it be structured? Should they follow a structure? Should they just try and work it out themselves? How many references should they use, and like what should these be from reflective journals? Should it, like, all these kind of different questions? Sometimes with grades, coming out with like wildly different grades for the same piece of writing. So there's lots of things which made us reflect on this and think about, you know, there's a big gap for students. And then for the students, where can we send them to support them? And we realised that in the institution in Glasgow, we didn't have anywhere for them to go, and anything for them to look at. So, had a great idea. Why don't we make a resource? And that was a great idea. And then, of course, then we applied for funding and actually got it, and we're like, oh no, now we've got to do it. So we had decided to make an asynchronous resource. So we wanted it to be grounded in scholarship so that we can do a little bit more with it. We wanted to be grounded in evidence as well. We were also really keen for it to I keep using the word reflect, I'm using a different word, but to reflect what was happening in Glasgow. And we wanted it to be quite bespoke for our students. We don't want just some generic thing. So therefore, what we thought we would do is check out current practices in Glasgow, find out what they are, write a literature review, see what the literature is saying, but then also gather data from across Glasgow, from across the colleges and schools in Glasgow. So we decided this, applied for the Learning Teaching Development Fund, and I got some cash for a research assistant and for some interns to help us to do that. So if we think about the mapping, first of all, now I thought that this would be quite easy. I don't know why I thought that. Because I thought, who's going to be doing this in Glasgow? Nobody. Like a few people. Yeah? Oh my God, it was like the biggest, it was so time consuming and arduous. And we actually found out that 345 courses in Glasgow have assessed, like summatively assessed, and it's summative that we're looking at, not formative, summatively assessed writing. And that went, for the way that we look at it, it was to give you like a snapshot of some of the reflective writing that's happening in Glasgow. It goes from level 1 to 6, so there's 4 years of undergraduate in Scotland, and then 5 is masters and 6 is like doctoral. So it went across all of that. A lot of it's concentrated at the master's level, so that's level 5 for us. Some things are quite typical, so health sciences are doing a lot of it. That makes sense. We probably all know that. Also, like School of Education have got a lot of cases of summative assessment for reflective writing. There was some weird stuff, like law had 1, and even like science and engineering had like 4 or 5. So I'm kind of like, we went to the course catalogue online and kind of just like went through it one by one, trying to find it, and started to get quite annoyed when I kept finding it. I'm like, oh, another one. Damn. But then chemistry, maths, physics, there was nothing. There was no reflective writing in there at all. Thinking about what staff were getting people to do, getting students to do, there was like the typical genres that you're probably familiar with, like a reflective essay, report, putting a portfolio together, maybe with some different artifacts, a reflective lab diary, which I can't quite remember what that was now, but a reflective journal, and also things like a statement, like a positionality statement or something like that. It tended to be that, or it tends to be at Glasgow, that the split of what is assessed reflectively in writing is like anything from 10% and maybe about 40%. Sometimes it's higher than that, but it tends to be the smaller part of the assessment, and it was sometimes in core or optional modules. So that's a kind of overview of the mapping process. And we had our research assistant kind of start to analyze a little bit of the data, and she's started to put together graphics. So for instance, this is the College of Arts. So at Glasgow, the college is like a faculty and has schools within it. So the College of Arts, where we are, has 4 schools, and you can kind of look at this visual and see kind of there's a lot of reflection going on in the College of Arts. We're in the School of Modern Languages and Cultures, which is actually the small one, but there's less going on. But of course in arts there's like theology and like quite a lot of things when you think about it. Of course people are reflecting on these courses. So the next step of it was, once we mapped everything out, we then decided to go and do a systematic literature review, okay? And we decided first of all on 3 questions for our systematic review. The first one was to look at the literature and try to find out what are the reasons that staff are introducing reflective writing for summative assessments. So that was the first question. We then took a second question, which was, what support are they providing? So if you think about the resource that we want to make, it's about supporting the students. So we're trying to look in the literature and see how are students being supported at the moment. Originally, when I put the bid together, I thought we could make a resource for staff, for students and staff, but I put in an expression of interest, and the feedback came back saying that it's probably too ambitious to look at both sides, so you should maybe look at one. So we decided to focus on the students. So our original question, third question for the review, was what is the student experience of reflective writing for summative assessment? And that's where we were going to stop. However, from doing the review, we found out that lots of papers being returned also included the teacher experience. So we thought that we would add that to the 4th question we added in later on to the process. So that was our 4 questions.
And the way we approached systematic literature review, we thought it would serve 2 purposes. So the first one is to help us understand what's out there in the literature in relation to the questions, and the other one is to help us form questions that we'll then ask staff and students when we will start collecting our data. So when deciding on the inclusion criteria, what was crucial for us is the focus on academic context. So reflection had to be in the academic context, and we're looking at the issue of summative assessment. And that was essential for us because previously I've mentioned the ethical issues. We wanted to see how others deal with the issue of assessing reflection and reliability, validity around this topic. When looking at the dates, so we decided on the range between 2007 and 23, and the way we decided on that, we looked at the Knowledge Hub of Advanced Higher Education, and 2007 was a time when there was more resources coming up focusing on reflection. So we thought we'll take it as our cutoff point and see what has been done in the last 15 years. We also focused on peer-reviewed papers, so there was another criterion that we used, and language, for obvious reasons, we decided on English. In terms of the search terms, we've been working very well as a team and trying to figure out which terms would help us produce the results that we can then analyze. So we're all working independently at first. We have decided on the databases, and we were working with different terms. The first one was assessment, and that was quite successful, but it was crucial for the project. With reflective, we're looking at different variations of the words, but then we thought we're getting too many results which were not relevant, so we stuck to reflective writing. And with higher education, we tried university, but then again, we're getting a lot of resources. So we then, as a team, decided on higher education after having done quite a lot of dry runs of the search items. In terms of databases, we have chosen Web of Science, ERIC, British Education Index. This was based on previous systematic literature reviews that we have seen, but also we wanted to have a broad scope. So we didn't want to focus on reflective writing in education or linguistics. We wanted to have quite a wide picture of university practice, so how reflection is used in different areas. So what we've done, we again independently use these different terms and then compare the results. So Web of Science, we have received 17 sources, ERIC 11 sources, and British Education Index 5 sources. We've tried ProQuest, but we're getting very few results. So we decided just not to use it.
We tried Google Scholar and we're just like, oh, I don't know how do you work this. No. And it was very, very difficult to try and get it to work in a systematic way that we wanted it to work.
We've watched a few YouTube videos, but we didn't find them useful, so we thought it's too much of a time investment to use it.
We also originally had the word summative in the search terms, but it wasn't coming back with anything really. It would be getting one or two results. So the word summative isn't, in the literature we have, isn't really used at all. And in terms of other languages, I think maybe something came back in Korean, maybe one or two, but they were mostly English anyway. They were almost
I think
all
we specified afterwards.
We wanted specified, that's right.
Yeah, we wanted English as well. So once we have got all the results, we used Zotero, and this was a very useful tool for us to work as a team, because we could all have access to the resources. It also showed us duplicates between different databases, so it saved us time. And what we did initially, we looked at the sources that we have received, we read the abstracts independently, and we put our comments in Zotero. So and again, it was a very helpful tool to help us work as a group. We then met and we talked about our reasons for either including or not including certain sources, and we've ended up with a list of 27 sources that we reviewed. So what we have found, I know. So in terms of the first question, I think we were not surprised to find out that a lot of the research that we have reviewed was linking reflection to workplace. So focusing on developing students' graduate attributes, but also linking theory and practice. So this idea of allowing or helping students make theory-informed decisions in their practice. Employability was another common theme that was appearing in the literature, and it was linked to a lot of medical context, the specific research focusing on students of pharmacy, and reflection allowed students, and using graduate attributes as a framework, allowed students to talk about their experiences in a way that is relevant to their future practice. It was also a lot about developing students' professional identity. So in reflective tasks, they were designed in such a way that they would focus on the attributes that are relevant to a specific profession. So for example, more caring aspects in medical context, as in the Monis paper. It was also about developing teacher competence, so trying to have more authentic assessment where students were talking about their experiences in their teaching practice and then linking these experiences to theory and discussing them in relation to theory. And what was interesting with this specific paper that, and I'll talk about it in question 2 in a second, that the more support the students were given, the more successful they were in terms of linking theory and practice. There was also the idea of creating like a safe environment or controlled environment where students can reflect on their experiences and discuss them in an assessment, but then it's relevant to their future practice, so they can kind of test and find out if what they're doing is what is expected then when they start working. It was also about developing students' higher order thinking skills, so being critical, evaluating, reflecting on the experiences. And very often these were difficult experiences, as for medical students. So this assessment allowed the students to have a safer space to do it. There were issues, there's also pedagogy related, so to promote active learning, make students more engaged in the process, and promote lifelong learning skills. Some of the papers, like for example Grant, it was an idea of just producing evidence of learning. So having this source or portfolio where students were providing evidence of the journey that they have been through during the year. In terms of the support, So a lot of the projects that we have been looking at involved students. So there were, for example, action research, where students were actively involved in assessment, like, for example, grading mock reflections, having a chance to being formatively assessed, and that was helping them develop their reflective writing skills. The idea of constructive alignment was also important for the development, or supporting students in developing their reflective writing, and mainly because the courses in Howell's paper, they're focusing on making sure that the students are tested or assessed on what they have been taught before. So this was not something new, and it was well scaffolded, and students were prepared for that assessment. There was also a range of resources, so guidance documents. There were discussions in the Dunn's paper of graduate attributes, and here in the specific context, graduate attributes were a framework. So the students were given a framework then to use to talk about their experiences. But also there were information packs with rubrics, writing samples. So essentially there was a lot of support for students to make the assessment process more transparent. So the students exactly knew what they were assessed on and how they could address it. And there were also reflective writing sessions that students could attend.
In terms of the third question, which is what is the student experience of reflective writing for summative assessment, we categorise this at the moment in two ways: of positive experiences and then more problematic experiences. Both of them are many and various. There's a whole ton of different experiences going on, but something which is it comes through the literature as being important to students was that scaffolding and actually being supported through the reflective writing process, and it comes in lots of studies. And one thing that students speak very positively about through the literature is that help that reflective writing gives to them in terms of helping them to conceptualise their discipline, to learn more deeply and actually try and connect what they're doing at university with the real world. This is particularly important for students who will work with people where there are serious consequences. So if you're in the medical sciences, what you do actually matters, and therefore being competent but also being aware of the level of your competence is really important, to not overestimate yourself. So there's a whole lot of intricate things within the literature that tells us about experiences of and how students are having positive experiences. However, of course, there are lots of problematic experiences, and some things are, for instance, pragmatic, such as busy students that just don't have time to put something together, like busy medical students don't have time to put a portfolio together. So there's some kind of pragmatic things like that. However, there's some other interesting issues, such as writing in the first person, and how actually if you've never done that before, that is a really difficult thing to do. And actually we then kind of move into slightly more kind of ethical issues of you're being forced as a student to do something that you're not comfortable with, which is maybe evoking a really emotional response. So if you've never been so close to your assignment, then how are you supposed to get there? How are you supposed to be vulnerable? And how does that make you look in front of the educator? So we're kind of getting into a lot of ethical issues. Therefore, what we also saw in the literature review was that there's a lot of performativity. So to get around this, students are just performing reflection because perhaps they don't want to talk about things which have happened to them. This comes through as well in the teacher experience. So we're still kind of analysing this, but the positive experiences are like what you would expect them to do. I'm sure everyone here has an interest in reflective writing, and there's lots of positive things about it. However, from the literature, which I actually think is more interesting, is that there's a lot of concerns about reflective writing. So for instance, is it reliable, and is it valid? And I think some of it comes back to what we've talked about already with marking and assessment. But if students are just performing it, is it actually doing what it said it would do, or it's supposed to do? So is it valid? Then how much of it can be reproduced? And of course, the person marking it comes with their own self and sees the world in a particular way. So there's a lot of moving parts within it, a lot of variables. The ethical concerns come up a lot from the teacher point of view, and making the case really that we do need to embed support for reflective writing. But Marsh, the 2013 paper, actually highlights a lot of stuff. So for instance, if I were going to ask students questions, personal questions about their experiences in a research project, I would have to get ethical approval to do that. But if I want to do it as an assessment, I can just set it as an assessment. And then there's also a power dynamic there between myself and the student, which is another ethical issue. I'm making them tell me stuff, and then I will judge them and give them a grade about it. Yeah, I'm sorry that was harrowing, but it's not in the learning the learning outcomes. So there's a lot of issues there. And are we re-traumatizing somebody? Like, okay, it sounds a little bit dramatic, but it could be. We could be asking someone to go over something which was traumatizing for them and actually making them go through that again. So there's a lot going in there in terms of ethics and like anti-oppressive practices. Thinking about recognizing diversity more, recognizing the individual experience, and actually developing rubrics which fit like specific disciplines. And for our resource, we want it to be very broad, where a lot of different people, the different students can access it. It's not like a one-size-fits-all. Yeah, so that was the results from the literature review so far.
So going forward, the good news is we finally got our ethics.
Yeah, we got our ethics back yesterday.
Yesterday. So
thank you.
Hopefully the project will take off from now on, and we'll start creating, first of all, collecting data from staff. We have decided to use a questionnaire for just essentially pragmatic reasons, because we know that everybody is busy at university, and if we were to organize focus groups or interviews, probably not many people would be able to help us. So we're hoping to get quite a few responses from different departments, and essentially what we want to get a snapshot of what the teachers think about reflection and reflective writing, and how they use it and what they expect students to do in different disciplines. So this will give us an overview of different approaches to reflection, purposes, and also different models of reflection that different departments are using. We're then planning to interview or have a focus group. We'll see how it with students from, again, different departments, and see what their experiences are. So where do they feel they need support? Which parts of reflection they struggle with? Is it the kind of the more practical side, more support in understanding what reflection is, or there are issue with the type of questions they're asked, and the issue that Mickey was talking about, the ethical issue or affective issue of talking about difficult emotions or experiences in the writing. So what we are hoping to create is kind of like a menu approach, where students just go to that resource and they're looking at different tasks and different approaches to reflection, and they're choosing things that are relevant to their course, their discipline, and they're scaffolded and taken on a journey to develop their skills. What we are hoping to do after the first pilot year, once we've developed the resource, and the resource should be ready because we have 2 interns. Yeah. I'm saying this, but we'll see how it goes. So hopefully it will be ready for September, October. Hopefully.
Yeah, it's going to be ready by then.
It will be ready at some point. So once we have piloted the resources, we want to get students' feedback. And we want to see how we can then make it even better so that it works for the student and supports them in developing deep learning and not only kind of reflecting on a superficial level. And then the plan for the future is to also work with the staff and see where staff needs support.
We also have a few of our own reflections as well, and we have been utterly antagonized by the university and its systems, unfortunately. So getting our recruitment process has been crazy slow, so that's what's held everything up. So to get our RA in place took a very, very long time.
For
so
months?
Months and months, yeah. So if we did it again, we'd actually just kind of like lie about when we needed them to get everything going earlier. So that was one reflection that we definitely had. Something that we also realised that actually regular meetings and building in time to our schedule was really important to try and make a project like this happen, and speaking to line managers to build that time in. But we did something really important in this project which has worked really, really well for us, which was to actually decide how we wanted the ethic in the group to be and what we wanted the dynamic to be. And we decided that, okay, this is ambitious, we have a lot to do, but we're just not going to get stressed about it, right? We're just going to enjoy our time because we get on well, and we're not going to get stressed out about it, because you know what? Everything's stressful enough, and it's actually worked really well for us. We get things done, but we don't get stressed. So that's one of my reflections. Was there anything else?
No, I think that summarizes quite well.
That's some references. Thank you. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Yeah.
Just from your reading, you've obviously done a lot of reading around the subject, was there any did you do any reading around reflective assessment within business? Or did
Yeah.
that not come up?
Yeah, business did come up, yeah.
And is there anything you can share on that?
Well,
Types
I
of
think at the moment, I think I'm blank.
That's a lot of pressure, I know, but
Yeah, it did come up. I can't think of what it came up in.
I don't think that there was.
It's not that much from business. There was something in an Asian business school, I remember.
There was, I think, one paper I think that we got from business. I can't remember the details, but I think when we were looking at the findings, what we have found out that mostly it was education and medical degrees, and we kind of made that assumption, or we thought that inferred that maybe it's because these are the professions that deal with people, and therefore kind of this reflective aspect was quite important.
Yeah. So quite often it was a practitioner investigating their own practice to work out whether or not it was helping their students, because there's consequences. So there's not, you're right, there's not that much
which
in
makes
business.
sense, and it's very authentic.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering with the whole AI thing and maybe knee-jerk reactions to now people going, right, we're all going to do reflective assessment, and how that's going to play out in different
Yeah, no, that's really
disciplines.
interesting, and there's certainly nothing that's come up with what we looked for within in that data set about that. No. Hi.
I just want to say thank you so much for, I think, shedding light on the ethical issues. I don't think enough.
I hadn't thought much about it either before this. Yeah.
And it, as an academic practice tutor, I kind of have to support students with reflective writing a lot. And I've seen sort of subject tutors throwing it in as a secondary element to a primary assessment. And they don't, the word allocation is like, about 550 to 750 word count, like
Chuck it in, yeah.
And students are really stressing, how do I do, I've got to mix in feelings, emotions, into theory, blah, blah, in 750. And it just doesn't flow, and it becomes actually a very stressful experience for students. And then the tutors are like, well, how do we mark this? There's too much emotion.
Yeah.
There's not enough into theory.
And something which could have been really useful just goes out the window. And
absolutely. And I think I think when I'm sort of trying to create material and resources to support the students, I really struggle because I haven't found a lot more, and I'm really glad we said Google Scholar is.
Oh, that was awful.
It was.
Yeah,
And
really.
I think there's so much that I haven't been able to find. I'm having to create a lot just to support the students. I actually had one student who passed, and she said, well, I wanted more, I wanted a higher grade. Can you just tell me, because I don't understand what I could have done more.
I think it's a bigger problem because it's about the students, but I think it's also the teachers who don't really know what they're looking for. And we had one research, it was focusing on Hong Kong and newly trained teachers or early practitioners, 2 to 3 years of experience, and they were looking at the kind of different levels of engagement with assessment. So on conceptual level, the teachers were quite comfortable with assessment, but there were issues with praxeological level, where relating to validity, reliability. The teachers themselves didn't know what they were marking and how they were marking, so then it's difficult to support the students, because maybe on this occasion the student will get an A grade, but the same piece of work can be marked by someone else as a B or even a C. And then there was the issue also, they were talking about the affective factors and the issues of ethics and the power relation as well. So it's a very subjective piece of work.
It's very complicated.
Can I just support that? Because I had one teacher say, Jazz, can you just read this because I'm not able to grade this. Because there was lots of fine lines within there. But on the other thing about ethics, there was a student who shared a trauma that she'd experienced in her childhood, and she was I was supporting her with sort of all the writing structures, and I actually broke down. I wasn't prepared to read what I read, and then I couldn't be objective anymore. It became subjective.
Yeah, it's just a lot. It's absolutely a lot. Thank you very much for your comments. So, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I think everyone had a bit of a chuckle when you were showing how many examples of reflection you'd found.
Yeah, that was a shock.
Not necessarily a huge surprise, because it just seems to be going nuts. Everyone's
I think I was quite naive in that I thought there would just be a few.
Do you think there's any risk that students are being overly asked to reflect these days?
I think for me the ethical thing is just huge, and if we're asking them to reflect without the scaffolding in place, then I think it's a serious problem, personally.
Do you think we might be going OTT with it, that it could just be hard back a little bit?
Maybe, I'm sure. I don't know what you think about that, Anita. I think we need to think about the reasons for doing it, and if they're justifiable reasons, and if there's support in there to help the student.
I think that it has become a little bit of a tick box, creating an innovative forms of assessment, and suddenly everybody just jumped on their PIT forms that we have and kind of changed. Okay, we'll add some reflective component, and somebody's like add on. So there are courses where it's kind of well embedded and scaffolded, and there is more preparation, so students, it's a more transparent process. But then again, we need to take into account that we have varied groups of students at the university, so not everybody comes with the same level of literacy, and also from completely different educational backgrounds, so that everybody, if we're assessing students, we need to make sure that we know what we're expecting from them, and we're preparing them in this journey. It can't be one-off session, workshop. It should be systematic and well embedded.
It's like, think about if you were doing a research project and you asked for ethics, what would you do? You'd make sure you'd have like a plain language statement, or you'd make sure that the participants knew what they were getting into before they did it. And I think that's maybe a step that could go in. Did someone else have their hand up?
Yeah, I don't know. I was going to repeat that, but I think I said to my student,